GM, everybody. Welcome back to your bi-weekly Frax check, your bi-weekly vibe check. I'm your host, Capital K, and we'll be going straight to the source of truth via checking the chain. But before we do that, please hit that like and subscribe button. We appreciate it. And first things first, Merry FraxMas, everybody, and happy holidays. We here at Flywheel wish you and your loved ones a wonderful and joyous time of the year and to close out this year strong as we are here ourselves. And with that note, in this final Frax check of the year, there will be definitely some high points, but also some low points. And much like this year, we feel like it's representative of kind of our journey so far. And hopefully by the end, just like how we're ending the year here, we end on a high note. But regardless, let's dive right in. First things first, the Frax stablecoin. And it seems like we are holding steady here at 649.5 million. No change since the last Frax check. So we're just going to move straight on ahead. And one quick note, we actually did fall from I think almost 900 something million at the beginning of the year down to 600 something million. So this is definitely quite a precipitous fall and hopefully only up from here. Moving on, we got to check the peg. Per the dashboard, we have a peg at a high of $1 to a low of 0.999. Now, we can't just trust, market. We can't just trust dashboards. We're going to go into the market. So I went to 1inch and I smashed the pool with a $60 million swap. And that gives us an exchange rate of, or rather 60 million Frax gives us an exchange rate of 0.9956. Now, at the beginning of this year, I started it with, I believe, 100 million Frax swaps to USDC. And then over time, I had to parry it lower and lower because our Frax Base Pool was either getting uber and uber imbalanced, which then led to the pool having to be rebalanced, thus reducing the pool. And now here we are at the end of the year with a balance of, or an imbalance of 75-25 between Frax and USDC. And we'll cover a bit more in the Frax Base Pool portion of the presentation. But so far, this is the state of where we are right now. So when swapping 60 million Frax, we come out to be 0.9956 USDC exchange rate. Moving on, we have our balance sheet. Here we saw a pretty nice bump in our asset, up 50 basis points to 4.1 million, and we saw our assets decrease by 600,000. So that means that the equity, or here the balance, must raise high enough for it to offset the liability. So here we see a bump of 4.8 million in our balance equity. Great to see. And that's the reason why that's beneficial, is because to calculate the collateral ratio, you take the total assets, which went up, minus the lock liquidity, gives you the treasury assets, and then you divide that by the liabilities, which went down, which means our collateral ratio, increased by 80 bips. We are now at 95.4%, ending a year very strong on a high note there. There was one point in time when we had dropped to, I believe like the 91 or the high 90 point somethings, and that was make me sweat a little. But here we're definitely holding strong at a 95.4%. So you kind of love to see that. Now moving on, as I mentioned earlier, we have our Frax BP, aka the liquidity as a service product for Frax. And here we saw a drop of 22% in the TVL. Like I mentioned in the beginning, right? A little bit ups and a little bit down. So here we obviously are experiencing a down. And with this 22% drop in TVL, though what's interesting is the pool is still imbalanced. Normally, when we see a large drop like this in TVL, it's because the team is rebalancing. But here it seems like an LP just effectively withdrew their liquidity out of the pool here. So we saw the USDC portion drop massively by basically almost half into where we have right now 79 million Frax and 26 million USDC, giving us a TVL of 104 million. Now, the volume, though, that's generated by this month was quite nice. We facilitated 45 million for this month in December, which represents about a 43% of the TVL. So good utilization rate there. Now, when we compare Frax-related liquidity pools across curve, I would say this is another down, as things looked great at the beginning of the year or closer to the middle of the year, where we were almost every Frax related pool, meaning Frax Base Pool, Frax 3 CRV, Frax PP, were, if you add them up, 3x larger than 3 pool. There was one point in time where we were tracking what is the race between Frax Base Pool and 3 pool, and then how we managed to flip that and frankly just went above and beyond. But now we have definitely fallen down. So if you add up all the Frax related pool on curve, we're only at like 172 million, I believe, compared to 188 million on 3 pool. So we are now only 0.9x that of 3 pool, all the way from the high of like 3.3x. So big pain there, big pain there. Now, where else can you put your Frax stablecoin instead of just a Frax BP? Well, we have sFRAX. Here, sFRAX has been launched for, I want to say, almost 15 weeks now, 13 weeks, something around there. And we have also, again, just been seeing it bleed lower and lower. We had an all-time high supply at 45 million. And then now we bled all the way down to 20 million of sFRAX supply. But the APY though is still steady Eddie at 5.4%. The current number of holders of sFRAX is 176 holders. Very, very stable in terms of holders there. We initially lost a chunk of holders given kind of the bull market was starting up, and I would imagine nobody wants to hold stables earning treasuries during a pre-bull. But for after that first wave, the remaining sFRAX holders pretty much been stagnant for the last almost a month or month and a half or so. So that's where you could put your sFRAX, and if you want to earn some treasury yields natively on chain, sFRAX is a great option for that. Now, moving on, we have the other stablecoin of Frax protocol, and it is a crowd favorite. That is the frxETH. Here we have a 305,780 frxETH for the month of December, the final month of 2023. This represents a 1.7% bump. Frankly, we've been going through a pretty sluggish period in terms of growth rate. We've been hovering around this like low single digits, 2.4s, and percent growth. And it's not great. And largely a reason is because our competitors are also growing at the same rate, if not faster, and they are larger than we are. So that means we would have a tremendously difficult time catching up. But we know our product is superior because I will show you the numbers prove it. But now let's just first dissect where are all of these frxETH hanging out. So a majority, or the lion's share, 71%, is currently in sFRAXETH. This is the native ETH staking rewards contract. So you just park your frxETH in here and it will earn as if you are earning the native staking yields. Now, if you wanted to provide LP, you have options of FraxETH, FraxETH, and FraxETH. And you kind of total those up equals to about the remaining 20% of all of FraxETH supply. The remaining 9%, this is what we call the monetary premium, where folks are openly and willingly just holding FraxETH without even touching anything else. Meaning it's not being used in liquidity pools, not being like farmed within the native Frax ecosystem. It's being used elsewhere for other things. We'd like to see this because that means everybody else here, everyone else in sFRAXETH or in the FraxETH pairs, they effectively get a nice 9% bump. So go us. But again, remember, this is still a stable coin. So we got to check the peg. Here, when I go to the market, when I swap 3,500 FraxETH, I get an exchange rate of 0.986. Now, frankly, I don't like this because I know that we have been able to do 0.99 and above for the majority of this year. So seeing it kind of low here just makes me have a hunch that, hey, we might be imbalanced. And lo and behold, when you check the liquidity pools, we are indeed imbalanced with a 75-25 split, where we have 75% of frxETH being paired against 25% of ETH, WETH, and sTETH. And but the liquidity though is quite deep. We have over 172 million TVL across the three pools. So the liquidity is definitely there. It's just the fact that it's slightly imbalanced. And here is kind of okay because Frax ETH, you could always redeem it for the underlying ETH. You know, obviously there's the queue and such. So this slippage, or however you want to call it, could easily be remedied if you're just willing to wait for the withdrawal queue. But anyways, moving on, I want to give you guys a landscape of how the LSD space is doing right now. So frxETH is currently number 4 on the charts, okay? Granted, this is not a big deal, but if you were to see how many number of LSTs are being released, being number 4 is kind of meaningful. And when you stack us up against our competitors, you'll see it even more clearly. But before we get there, I want to talk about frxETH's current space. So frxETH is occupying the 4th place at 2.5% market share. Lido is obviously on the tippity top with 75% market share, and Rocket Pool is at almost 9% market share. So, like I was saying, we're growing in low single digits, but so are our competitors. But our competitors are way bigger than we are. So we definitely need to be growing at a much faster rate. And we should be growing at a much faster rate because we are definitely earning way more yields than our competitors. You see here, this is the snapshot on the right-hand side. We have 682 million in TVL, and that is earning 4.3% in APY. Lido is earning 3.8 and Rocket Pool is at 3.2. Now remember, this is a snapshot. So let's take a look at what it's like year to date, which you could do by going to fax.frax.finance and click on the frxETH tab. And there'll be a nice little tool for you to compare here. So this graph shows from year to date what it was like, what you would have received if you had staked 1,000 ETH with sFRAXETH instead of sTETH or rETH. For rETH, you would have been 45% better off staking with sFRAXETH. That is not a cherry pick number. That is historical, and that is over a very large sample size of a year. So take it as it is. Secondly, is if you prefer much deeper liquidity, you would offer the sTETH option. But if you go to sTETH option, you're also taking a 28% haircut from what you could be earning with frxETH. Again, here is very clear that frxETH dominates in the yield department. And if you're optimizing for yield, I would imagine here is where you're going to want to go to do so. All right, moving on. We have the final, I guess, the middle child that was forgotten, but no longer forgotten, and that is FPI. This is the Frax Price Index. The supply of FPI is currently 84.5 million, and the annual inflation rate is 3.1%, and the current FPI peg is actually above this inflation index by 1 bip. So it's pretty much keeping on track with inflation as it should. And how is it doing that? It's doing it with this 92.8 million treasury. It's being put to work across all of DeFi to earn the yields. And as it earns yields and as the annual inflation rate keeps on decreasing, the equity of the FPI increases because any excess above that inflation rate is being put back into the treasury as like this buffer in case something happens. And so far, this buffer has grown to 4.7 million. And there have been some talks with FPI and FXS coming together. So perhaps this 4.7 million could just be all rolled up into FXS's treasury, which is quite good. Quite good for things to consolidate and come home. Moving on, we have FraxLend, which is part of the DeFi Trinity, and this is a home-built solution for our lending protocol. And currently, we have 286 million in TVL, and out of that, 76 million is being borrowed. This represents an 84% utilization rate. And the way I take utilization rate is I take the amount being lent and I take the amount being borrowed, and I take borrowed divide by lent to give you, how much the money's being used. And here we have 84%. Very healthy, very much where I like to see it. I like to see it around the low 80s to basically high 70s. And this is exactly where we are at utilization rate. And as you can see from the charts below, we are pretty much at the tippity top on both the borrowed value and the collateral value inside the FraxLend. So we are operating on full cylinders. This is what peak performance looks like. And just a quick recap that we did for our podcast for the flagship Flywheel pod. We look back in when Curve's founder had to repay his loan on FraxLend first before any other protocol. That just speaks to the innovative design and the safetiness of the FraxLend design that Mitch had to pay down FraxLend first before going after any of his other outstanding positions. So go us. All right, moving on, we have our FraxSwap, the final last leg of the DeFi Trinity. Here, what's interesting is this is the DEX that nobody talks about. It has, mediocre volume, 69, 70 million, call it that. But it facilitates literally about its pool, about its TVL every month. So if you kind of go back to all the FraxCheck, you see that it pretty much pumps out its whole it turns over its whole TVL every month, which is incredible to say, because I don't think a lot of DEXs could do that, or not a lot of liquidity pools can do that. But this, FraxSwap does it with the whole DEX. Granted, there's also the power law that applies here. So here you see that FXS and Frax is actually the largest pair being traded on FraxSwap. Again, obvious. We built FraxSwap so that we needed a solution for our problem, and this was the tech solution that we came out with. And it just so happened a lot of people like to use it too, such as IQ Frax. And here you see the FXS Frax pair generated 12.4 million in volume over the past 7 days. And this is kind of where it is normally. At one point in the bear, it dropped down to like 3 or 5 million for the 7-day period, which was abysmal. But anyways, here's where we are, and it's up only from this point, we hope. All right, moving on. This portion, I call it the show me the money portion, aka the profitability. And we kick it off real quick, real hot with the one and only FraxLend AMO, one of my favorite AMOs now. I used to love the Curve AMO, but I'm starting to love this AMO much more. Let me share with you why. So far, FraxLend is minted 86 million Frax, but only 66 million is being lent out. So that means there's still 20 million Frax on deck, ready to be kind of deployed into the Frax lending marketplace. Now, from the lent Frax AMO obviously the FraxLend AMO generates some APR, right? Because we earn money from the interest. Here we saw that in December we earned $290,000 from lending out Frax. Go bull market, go lending, go risk taking. But please stay safe. And on the next slide, we'll talk about that. But here we see that in total, since FraxLend started, we've generated $1.5 million in Frax, or 1.5 million Frax, I should say. That represents about a 9% APR. And this is a historical calculation of the APR, not forward. So this is real. Like we'd really net down 9% during the freaking bear market, which is freaking awesome. So, and I quickly did an annualized run rate on that. At 290K, an annualized run rate is about $3.5 million from this one product line alone. And that's just talking about the interest revenue. Let's talk about the liquidation fees, which I said earlier, please be careful out there. We don't like this line item. I honestly don't like this line item. I think this is not good for anybody. It's a net negative because people don't like to get liquidated, obviously, but it is revenue that we will take it and we'll gladly take it. But the point is, everyone stay safe out there, because in December, we did manage to knock down $46,000 in liquidation fees, but 2 liquidation, unfortunately, coming from the same user, ouch, they lost $20,000 on their Frax WBTC position, and they lost $11,000 on their sFRAX position. Very, very pricey, very, very expensive. And all I can say is stay safe out there. Now, lastly, or secondly, we have our FPI monthly revenue, and FPI printed this month with a almost $139,000 in profit. That is after paying out all of its liabilities to keep the FPI at peg. This $139,000 is going to be rolled into the equity portion that I mentioned earlier. And here you see in the chart that there was a period in time, basically from maybe after May up until I would say even October, we were just bleeding in terms of the FPI losses. But in the Q4, it really, really stepped up and started outperforming. Now, lastly, we have our FraxETH revenue line. Here, we basically generated about 138K for the month of December. And if you annualize that, it comes out to be about like $1.6, $1.5 million. So not bad. I feel this is a product that could easily get way more adoption. So there's a lot more upside here from my analysis. But the way I like to think about revenue or how to calculate it is you take its average income per day, which is 25.5 ETH, multiply that by 365 days, then multiply that by 8% because that's the fee share, then divide that by 12 to give you a monthly number in ETH, and then you can multiply that by whatever ETH price you so choose. Here, though, this 8%, I gotta say, it's going to change with FraxETH v2 because right now 4% is supposed to go to the validator and 4% goes into this insurance pool. But obviously, since in V1 Frax the DAO runs its own validator, so we get to keep the whole pie. But in the future, obviously, other people can run their own validators, and that would obviously be a split. But anyways, that has been a really, really fun 20 minutes with you guys. And I'm so glad that you stuck with us throughout the bear market and that going into 2024, we're only going to have great things ahead. And maybe there's some inkling signs that the bulla is back. And with that, I will see you soon and happy holidays and happy new year. Peace.